Hello all, welcome to Hacker Heap. In this tutorial, we will set up a Eureka server and two clients which will be registered to the Eureka server. Eureka server is from Netflix and it's being maintained by Spring Cloud team. Eureka server is nothing but a service registry, and the clients we are going to build are nothing but the REST services which registers itself to the Eureka registry. I have my Spring initializer open, so let's go ahead and generate a Eureka server project from here. This is the beauty of Spring initializer. You can just add all the dependencies here and download that project and open it in the Spring tool. So it's something that is handy when you are creating a new project. So I have this group ID already, and the artifact ID I will say like Eureka server, and the dependency I need to add is Eureka server. And let me also add a discovery client. So yeah, both of them. That's it. I will generate the project and it will give me the downloadable zip file. Now I have the project here, and let me unzip it. So I have the Eureka server project here, and I will go ahead and open my Spring tool suite and import the project to the Spring tool suite. Here you go. I had the Spring tool suite here, open projects from file system, and I'll import it. So I have the project here. That's it. You finish. So it's updating the Maven project configuration. So let me go ahead and see what all files are here inside it. So in the Eureka server project, the Spring initializer created a pom.xml which had the Spring Boot starter version 2.2.3, which is Hoxton SR1, and it added the dependency that I needed, the Spring Cloud Starter Netflix Eureka client and the Spring Cloud Starter Netflix Eureka server. And it also had a couple of other dependencies that we need. So everything is in place. Let me go to source file and see what are files it created for me. So it created the package structure according to our group ID and artifact ID that we gave in the Spring initializer. So, and it created the Spring Boot application here. To make the Spring Boot application in Eureka server, all you need to add is enable Eureka server. When you run the Spring Boot application, this makes this application as a Spring Boot Eureka server application so that the clients can register. Now let's go to the resources and see there is an application properties file. This is where you have to give all the Eureka server details, like we will see one by one later. But instead of the properties file, I tend to use the applications YAML file. So I will create, instead of using the application properties file, I will create an application YAML file. It's almost the same. Instead of properties file, we will have an YAML extension, and the script inside it will be in the YAML format instead of regular properties file format. I'll go ahead and create a file. Just create a file with the application.yml file. Okay. I'll just go ahead and remove it. So when you are starting the Spring Boot application first looks for bootstrap properties file, and then if a bootstrap properties file is not found, it looks out for application properties file. Now in this case, it will look for bootstrap YAML file or application YAML file, whichever is available. In the YAML file, we will go ahead and give the server port where you want the Eureka server to run on your local machine. I'm giving a 1990 port to run the Eureka server, and Eureka expects some properties like Eureka client service URL, and if you want to register this service with Eureka or not, and the default zone. Let's go ahead and give those properties quickly. So you can see once you added the dependency, the Spring Tool Suite will give you suggestions on what to add. I'll say like, so we are looking for Eureka client register with Eureka, which is eureka.client.register with Eureka. I will make it as false because I don't want the server to register itself to the Eureka server. So let's make it false. And the other property I want to give is like fetch registry, and which also I don't want to do. The default are true for these two of the things, where once you added it, once it sees the Eureka dependency, it will go ahead and try to register that service to the Eureka server. In this case, I don't want that to register. And the last one I'll give is the service URL. The default zone, I'll give the localhost HTTP in which the server will come up. 1990, the port we have given, and Eureka. So let me change this to service URL. Yeah, that's all we need. Let's go ahead and try to run this application, the Spring Boot application, run as Spring Boot app. Looks like the server started on port 1990. Let's go ahead and see what's there at 1990 port. So I have my browser open here, 1990. If you see this, this is the Eureka Server UI. You might be thinking you didn't create all of this UI, but when you enable the tag at enable Eureka Server, Spring already had a boilerplate code for you. When you run the Spring Boot application, it brings up the app which is embedded inside it, the Eureka Server. If you see here, the DS replicas are the local host on which the server is running, and the instances currently registered with Eureka, there are no instances registered with Eureka. Now we will go ahead and try to register two services, service 1 and service 2, and we will try to connect those services through Eureka Registry. Let's go back to our Spring Initializer project and create two Spring Boot services quickly. I have my Spring Initializer here. Let me go ahead and create two projects named Client 1 and Client 2. Client 1, and I will add the same Eureka client and Eureka Server to this, and let's go ahead and generate that. Let me go ahead and do this client 2 and do the same thing. I already added them, so it went ahead and created my client 1 and client 2 here. Now let me go ahead and open my Spring Tool Suite and open these two projects there. Open project directory. Here you go. If you go ahead and see the pom.xml for these two, it would have added that Eureka Server and Eureka client to them. It's building for a minute. Let me close all this. So now I opened this Spring Boot application file in the client 2 project. To make this as a client to the Eureka Server, all you need to do is enable discovery client. There are two types of Eureka clients that you can use. One is the discovery client, and the other one is enable Eureka client. In this case, I'm going ahead and using the discovery client instead of the Eureka client. I will do the same thing with the client 1 project. The client 1 project, I'm doing the same thing, enable discovery client. So yeah, application, I will go ahead and update the application YAML file with the port number and the Eureka configuration details for both the projects client 1 and client 2. I'll go ahead and give the port number as a 8080 for this one. And give the Eureka properties. The properties that I need here is the instance properties, the host name, all this stuff. For the host name, instead of me hard coding it, what I did is here recap.application.uri is an Eureka property. It will pick up the host name from here instead of me hard coding it. There are multiple ways to register your client to the Eureka server. One way is by preferring an IP address. It will register with an IP address, and I'm making it as true in this case. And the other one is lease renewal interval in seconds. 10. Lease expiration duration in seconds, I'll say 20. So what this does is, for every 10 and 20 seconds, it will go ahead and check the health check of the particular client and make sure it's healthy or not. It will remove that client from its server registry. And for the client, similar to earlier, I will go ahead and give the service URL default zone. Same localhost. You need to make sure that Eureka server is up before you run the client service. Let me go ahead and give the name as client 2. I had given client 2. Let me go ahead and run it. Run as Spring Boot app. There you go. It went ahead and tried to register client 2 to the Eureka server. Let's go back to Eureka server and see if it got registered. If you see here, the client 2 got registered here. We will do the same thing with client 1. Let me copy this application YAML file and go to the client 1 project, and let me, so I have the application file here. We will change the application name to client 1 and the port to 8081 because the client 2 is already running on port 8080. I'll do the same thing. I will open the client 1 application and run it. So it started. Let's go back and see if it got registered to our Eureka server on 1990. So yeah, if you see here, the two clients are registered to the Eureka server. Now what we will do is we will call client 2 from client 1 using the Eureka server registry. The main advantage of the Eureka server registry is you don't have to expose the actual endpoint of the client service. In this case, for client 2, if I build a REST endpoint, I don't have to expose the endpoint localhost 8080/endpoint1 for the client 1 service to consume it. It can get it from the Eureka registry, so that you can keep those services private and not expose the URLs to the outside world. Let's go ahead and create a simple web service on both client 1 and client 2, and we will try to call client 2 from client 1 using Eureka load balancer client. Now to save some time, I already created the client 1 controller and the client 2 controller. So client 2 controller has a REST endpoint saying call client 2, which returns the response, a hello world response from client 2. And in the client 1 controller, I have a REST endpoint saying call client 1 or call client 2. I'll change it through client 1. So here we will be calling the client 2 endpoint using the Eureka registry. We will get the endpoint from registry and we will call the client 2 so that we will see this response showing up when you call actually the client 1. There is no endpoint saying call client 2 through client 1. The only endpoint that's here is the call client 2. So for that, to make the calls, I need to auto wire the load balancer client. I need to add the annotation auto wired. This means we are creating the object load balancer client. Now, once I had it, I will go ahead and write a function to get the base URL of that particular client. So I'm going ahead and writing the function to return the URL, the endpoint of the client to get base URL. In here, instantiate the Spring Cloud client. The service instance is nothing but the client instance that we will get from the Eureka server. We will use the load balancer client object that we created. Choose of service ID. Service ID is the app name here. The service ID is client 2. So we will give that here. And it's a string. Yeah. And I will return the URI of the service. URI dot to string. So it will get me the endpoint HTTP localhost 8080. This would return the HTTP localhost 8080. Now I need to call this endpoint and return this when we call this call client 2 through client 1. So I'm removing the code here. I will use the REST template. Let me keep it in try catch. So what I would do is return. I need to import the REST template object here. I need to create the REST template object before using it. Template. So let me use the REST template dot. The endpoint we are calling is a get endpoint on client 2 controller. I had a get mapping here, so it would be get for object, and the URI is get base URL plus I will give slash the endpoint here. There you go. And the response type would be the string response, so it would be string dot class. Yep, it's showing an error here saying that the return type doesn't match. So what we need to do is we need to convert this to the response entity string object. So what we will do is we will convert this to new response entity of string of, this would return a string, comma, HTTP status dot okay. There you go. So when it throws an exception, what I would return is just return the same response here, return the same thing if an exception comes, except that I would return instead of okay, I would do an internal server error, which is a 500 error. Yeah, this should be good. Let me go ahead and restart both of my services and let's see how it's coming over. I'm going ahead and starting the client 2 application. And once it gets started, I will go ahead and start the client one application. And I'm starting the client one application here. So looks like the annotation didn't work here. Let me go ahead and quickly change that. Instead of auto wiring it, what I would do is I would go ahead and create new REST template. Yep, this should be good enough. I'm restarting it again. Now let's go back to the Eureka Server UI and refresh it. So we have client one registered at my local 8081 port and the client 2 registered at 8080 port. Now I will have my Postman open here, and let's call client 2 and see what it sends. So see, this is the response we will get from client 2. If I change the port and call client 1, let's see what we'll get. See the response from client 1. This is the response that we are sending back from the client 1 controller class for this endpoint. Let's see what will happen if we call this endpoint. And see, I'm pointing to 8081, which is client 1 and not the client 2. See, it returned the response from client 2. If you go back to the console here, we can see it is trying to extracting the server list and flipping the property of client 2 and all that stuff. So here what it does is this load balancer client will go ahead and look into the Eureka server with the name client 2, and if it finds anything, it will return the port number and the server URL so that we can call that from client 1 through service. So client 1 doesn't know the actual endpoint of client 2. All it knows is it doesn't know the base path. It knows only the end of that, which is a client 2, call client 2 endpoint. So when you call this call client 2 through client 1, it actually called the localhost 8080 call client 2 and returned the response. So this is a pretty basic setup of a Eureka server and Eureka clients. This is pretty much useful in most of the microservice architecture. When you have like a n number of microservices, you need a registry to maintain all the services, and you don't want to expose the actual endpoints of the client, and you don't want to expose the actual endpoints of those services to the clients. They may be external or internal, and you can maintain all those services in that particular registry, and you can even manage the permissions for each client to interact with each other. So in this tutorial, we looked into how to set up a Eureka server with the Spring Boot application, and we registered 2 clients to the Eureka server, and we used the discovery client instead of the Eureka client, and we used the load balancer client to fetch the services from the Eureka server and call that endpoints. This is all about setting up the Eureka server and clients. Hope it's helpful. Please do subscribe to the channel and like the video. In the coming videos, we will go deep into Spring Cloud technologies more as needed.